Right, okay, thank you, Sam. You're telling me that we are now live, beaming out live to the world. Good evening, everyone, and a really warm welcome to the London Buddhist Centre main shrine room for our Wednesday evening class. My name is Suvarna Jyoti, and I'm going to be co-leading the class this evening with Prajnamanas, who's over there, but I will introduce you to him a little bit later on. So we're going to get started in a few minutes, and then I'll say a little bit about how the evening's going to go, particularly if you've not joined us before. But just while we're sort of waiting for people to join, also just to say we've got Sam and Fred behind the camera, so they are hopefully going to make us look fabulous. No, Sam's shaking his head. Oh dear, it's all gone horribly wrong already. So anyway, moving swiftly on. Sam, who's here this evening? Who have we got already?
There's nobody yet, unfortunately.
There's nobody yet. So I've just said all that to nobody.
There's people watching, just nobody introducing themselves.
Oh, I see. Oh, I didn't say that. That's probably why then, isn't it? Sorry, people. Yes, do say hello in the chat room, and if you would like to, say your name and where you are watching us from this evening. And then later on, if you have any questions and stuff, you can also put those into the chat room. If you just put a capital Q at the start, because we'll have a question and answer session later on. So, but yeah, let's see. Is anybody wanting to say hello, Sam? Who have we got?
We've got Stephen from Dundalk in Ireland.
Stephen from Dundalk in Ireland. I think somebody from Dundalk was here last week. Was it? I don't know if it was you, Stephen. Anyway, welcome. Anybody else?
We have Liz. Sophie from Harringay.
We have Liz. Oh, just the one Liz.
Just Liz.
Just Liz. Hello, Liz. Welcome. And Sophie, did you say?
Sophie from Harringay.
Sophie from Harringay, not so far, just up the road a wee bit from here.
James from Battersea.
James from Battersea, across the river, all in that other continent known as South London.
Elizabeth from Mexico.
Elizabeth from Mexico. Oh, I'm sorry, that does trump Battersea. Hello, Elizabeth from Mexico. Are you actually in Mexico at the moment? Or are you just from there? Let's just see if she's going to...
We have Go Deep from Port Talbot.
Go Deep, welcome back. I think you were here last week. Hello.
And Sophie's clarified she's from Miland.
Oh, Miland. Okay, even closer then.
And Leah is here saying hello.
Oh, Leah, our Leah from Wednesday night team. Hello, Leah, if that's you, and hello, Leah, even if it isn't you. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, great, lovely, good. Right, well, we're just about on 7 o'clock now, so we will make a start. So what we're going to do this evening is, in a moment, I'm going to lead a little meditation for us to just kind of arrive and settle. And then we will have, and then I will introduce Prajnamanas, and he's going to give us a talk this evening. So that will take us, all of that will take us up to about 5 to 8, and then we'll have a little leg stretch break. And then after the break, Prajnamanas and I will both kind of come on camera together, and if you've got any questions that you came up during the talk or anything that you want to ask us about, then you'd be very welcome to do that. So that's the kind of format for the evening, and then we'll be finishing about 8:30. What else do I need to say? Do I need to say anything else? I knew I'd forget something. No, everyone's looking blank. So I think that's probably everything I need to say at the moment. I will lead us in a little arrival sit. So why don't we set ourselves up to do that? If you've not meditated before, that's absolutely fine. You can just sort of find a comfortable but upright way of sitting, so not too slouched over, just to make sure that you're kind of firmly planted on the ground through your seat and your feet on the ground, and that your back is upright, and that the chest is a little bit raised so that you're not too slumped over, because you might well have been slumped over a keyboard most of the day. And then imagining yourself just rising up through the very, very top of your head and just letting the chin drop slightly so that the head is right on top of the spine. Almost like you're opening up the space at the base of the skull. And then just starting with a nice long out breath, like a big sigh. And then just letting the air come in naturally. And another big sigh. And as the air comes out, really letting yourself give your weight up to the earth. So really allowing yourself to take your place right here, right now, your place on the planet, and let the earth hold you. So tuning in with a sense of where you're in contact with the earth. Now that will probably be indoors. You're probably indoors now, maybe not, but probably. So you can just imaginatively connect through the floor and down through the foundations of the building, and imagine the soft, moist earth that is beneath us all, even underneath all our concrete and our cities. And having an imaginative, kind of energetic sense of the contact between you and the earth. And maybe just noticing that it's quite hard to really know where you end and the earth begins. There's a blending of the sensations. As we ground ourselves into the earth, and then just bearing in mind that through this contact with the earth, we are in contact with each other, everybody who's here just now, and with all other beings everywhere on the planet. Maybe imagining a sense of breathing in the earth's energy on the in-breath, letting it flow up into you, and then releasing energy back out into the earth on the out-breath. Just a nice natural breath, not trying to breathe in any special way, just following your natural breath, letting the energy come in and go out. And every time your mind wanders off somewhere else, that is totally, completely normal. All that means is that you are human. So you don't need to make that a problem. Just notice that your mind's wandered off and just gently bring it back and connect in again with your physical experience of the contact with the earth. And it doesn't matter if you have to keep coming back over and over again, that's absolutely fine. So letting the energy come in and up, and then out and down. as well as this sense of our being rooted down into the earth, we can also imagine ourselves rooted upwards into the sky. So all around us in every direction is the sky. So that sense of the infinity of the sky above and around us, and the intimacy of the sky that's right there as you breathe in and breathe out, as if you're breathing the sky in and out with each breath. Letting yourself open up to the energy of the sky as you breathe out, and the energy of the earth as you breathe in. And if that all feels too complicated, don't even worry about it. Just let yourself be present, connected to the earth. And in contact with the sky. And in between the earth and the sky is this breathing body. So tuning in now to an overall sense of your body in space. And imagining yourself breathing in and out of every pore of your skin. Within that overall sense of your body, just allowing a sense of the breath to kind of come a little bit into the foreground. So within this home of the body, we have the breath. And just as best you can, just letting yourself follow the breath, noticing the sensations of it, experiencing the sensations of it. Seeing if you can let yourself just become a little bit more subtly aware of what's going on in the breath. Coming back to that when you get lost. Within the body is the breath, and right at the centre of the breath is the heart centre, the physical heart, and also the seat of our emotional life. So as you tune into the breath, just see if you can also just notice what's going on in the heart. If there are any sensations there, how is it feeling? Physically and in terms of your the emotional weather. Seeing if you can just notice whatever that is and let it be there. So for the next couple of moments, until the end, until I ring the bell, staying with the body, the breath and the heart, coming back to that whenever you get distracted. And just in your own time, just coming out of that meditation, seeing if you can stay in contact with some of the feel of it as a place from which to open yourself up for our talk this evening. So, thank you. Right, we're getting a little bit more light. Okay, great. Well, hopefully we all feel a little bit more settled and centred after that little sit. So we're going to have a talk this evening from Prajnamanas. And those of you who've been joining us on Wednesdays will know we've been doing a series of talks broadly entitled The Way of Love, which is looking at various aspects of the Buddhist approach to love and positive emotion from kind of different perspectives. So Prajnamanas is going to continue with that theme for his talk this evening. But before he comes on, I'll just say a little bit about Prajnamanas. Now, he did give me a list of characteristics that he wanted me to convey at this point, but as it was slightly tongue-in-cheek, I'm not going to actually say them out loud because I think he just might be too embarrassed. But anyway, and the guys behind the camera are laughing at that too. So you're safe, Prajnamanas. I'm not going to. He's giving me the thumbs up for that. What I will say about Prajnamanas is as some of you will know, when we get ordained, a senior order member who knows us very, very well will be the one that chooses our new name, and the names are kind of designed to be partly a teaching, partly something that's aspirational to move towards, and also partly something that that senior order member already sees in us as the beginnings of something that can grow bigger. And sometimes, people come get ordained, and I think, oh yeah, that's an okay name, and yeah, no. And then there are other times when people get ordained, and I think, oh, that name is completely perfect for them. It couldn't be anything else. And I have to say, Prajnamanas is one of those people. So prajna is a Buddhist word for wisdom. It's the sort of infinite wisdom of the Buddha. And manas means something like mind. So I think I'm getting this right. I didn't check. He's nodding, so that's okay. So one way you could think of his name is that he whose mind has the wisdom of the Buddha. Prajnamanas is very much a man with a very, very fine mind, in every sense of fine, and not just that it's very clear thinking, but he's also very precise, and he thinks very, very deeply about, he could see the real detail of some aspect of the Buddhist teaching, and then he will reflect on that very deeply and thoughtfully, and comes up with some wonderful insights come out of that level of perceptiveness. So I'm very much hoping that we're gonna see some of that tonight. So I'm going to hand you over to him just now, and I'll see you later. So we'll just have a little bit of shuffling around now. Oops. Here we go.
Hello everybody, good evening from me. Am I sitting in about the right place? Yeah? Okay. Great. Thank you, Svanajyoti, for that very generous, I hope not over-generous introduction. Lovely to be teaching with you again. Thanks from me to Fred and Sam for helping tonight as well. Very nice to be with you all in the shrine room. And nice to be with you all out there. Yes, and sorry we can't interact more, but as Svanajyoti said, if you've got a question, just go ahead and type it while I'm giving my little talk. Why not, if something occurs to you? Just put a capital Q on the front and then your question, and the guys will read it out to me afterwards. We'll do a little bit of meditation as well after I finish speaking, so that you can let it be absorbed and ask a question afterwards as well if you like. But do be thinking already about what you'd like to discuss as I speak. So without further ado, I will carry on this series, which actually we finished this evening on the way of love, like Svanajyoti said, exploring Buddhist perspectives on love. I'm particularly going to be talking about the fifth stage of the Metta Bhavana meditation. So I can't ask for a show of hands of anyone who hasn't done the Metta Bhavana meditation before, but probably it's enough to say that the Metta Bhavana is a practice for cultivating friendliness, goodwill, fellow feeling, the sense of being for somebody's interests rather than against them. And we practice it in various stages. The fifth stage is the last one, and it extends our well-wishing or loving kindness, as it's also translated, beyond ourselves, the good friend, so-called neutral person and enemy that we've brought to mind so far, out into the sort of area around us, and eventually towards all beings. And that's why the practice is sometimes called the practice of universal loving kindness. So I'll talk a bit about that. And, my title is Going Beyond Prejudice, so I'll explore a little bit what it really means to feel you could be a friend to absolutely anybody, whoever they are. Okay, so just a little about this stage of the meditation as well. Probably most or all of you watching have practiced it. In the fifth stage, we bring together in our minds ourselves, the good friend, neutral person, enemy, like I say, and we start with those four people. So I think this can be forgotten about the fifth stage of the metta, that before sort of expanding out to include many, many even non-human beings, actually we gather in our mind the four people that we've had in our mind so far. And as I sometimes say, you'd probably end up there already with a selection of people that you would be unlikely to have dinner with or gather with at the same time. It will already give you quite an interesting spread of the people in your mind and in your life. And this stage is sometimes known as breaking the barriers. So what we experiment with, or sort of encourage ourselves towards, is as this fifth stage begins, and we've got the four people in our minds, including ourselves, we try to have equal loving kindness for all of them. So it could be a whole stage in itself, and I think it's possible sometimes not to get very far beyond that in the fifth stage. I think you can bring in more people, even if only more people in your life and a few more people you don't know. But interesting sort of challenge already in that opening of all four people at the same time, partly because it includes us. But you'll also get 3 or 4 quite different colours in your emotional spectrum confronting you straight away. One of those being yourself. And I think that's important for this stage, which particularly tries to cultivate equanimity. So quality I'll be talking about quite a bit. A Buddhist commentator, actually I think he might have been the man who enumerated these stages, so who turned this into a 5-stage practice, because the Buddha, in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, which is the original text he's thought to have spoken on which this practice is based, only really describes something like our 5th stage, which is also an indication that the 5th stage is, I would say, by a distance the most important one. You could even say that the first 4 stages are a preparation for it, basically. Buddhaghosa split it out into 5 stages. He was an Indian, I think he was a Mahayana Buddhist in the 10th century. I need to check that. Anyway, about 1,000 years ago, Buddhaghosa, a well-known Buddhist commentator, also wrote a work on ethics called The Path of Purification. Anyway, he split this practice out into something more concrete and more practicable. And he also said that if those 4 people, so yourself, your good friend, someone you don't have any strong feeling for either way, and somebody you dislike, if you had, it's like one of those philosophy problems, if there was a sudden disaster, like a flood or something, and you could only save 3 out of the 4 people, he says that equanimity, or this 5th stage of the Metta Bhavana, is telling you that, or rather is not telling you which person you sacrifice, even including yourself. So I found that very interesting. Maybe we can just think about that and bookmark it for later. So it's not actually saying, the Metta Bhavana, that in the end you just sacrifice yourself for the sake of these other people. And he said equanimity would just allow you to reflect on the problem with clarity and wisdom, which I found very, very interesting. So no kind of automatic answer, even where yourself is concerned. I suppose because there might be quite other considerations. So that equanimity, it really does embrace all beings of which we're one. So I just thought I'd sort of start by saying that this 5th stage isn't about forgetting yourself for the sake of other people. You could say, poetically, it's about expanding your own self to embrace all other beings. So I suppose I'm saying this because if you consider too many other beings, perhaps some people would find that their own self becomes lost, or they can only think about lots of other people if they stop thinking about themselves. But really, a way of turning that on its head would be to say that our own being just grows and grows and grows. We never actually discount it, but embraces more and more other beings within it, in a way. Okay, so that's what the fifth stage is, and something about how it starts. And it is, like I say, the culmination of the Metta-bhavana practice. And I thought I'd say something about why that is. In the opening stages of the Metta, we've probably got quite involved with ourself, the friend, perhaps struggled to stay involved with the neutral person, because by definition they're difficult to actually keep our mind on and have any real response to. Difficult to really just experience them. And the fourth stage is famously involving, I suppose, because aversion is... It's so interesting when people talk about the Metta-bhavana but don't necessarily say it. You can so often tell immediately that what they're really talking about is the fourth stage of the Metta-bhavana, the challenge of the Metta-bhavana, or the Metta-bhavana being difficult or something. Most often people are talking about this fourth stage, so we've probably got quite involved in that. But the fifth stage, where we start to just soften and quieten the individual relationships and people and their qualities, matters very, very much. I think some people even start to leave out the fifth stage because it's difficult to pull off. And I particularly warn you off that, sort of cutting off the origin of the practice, but also its heart. So do resist that if that's a temptation for you. So it starts to soften and quieten these individual things, and I think we start to face at that point the fact that the Metta-bhavana is not actually about particular relationships in our lives, although it will really nourish those and help us develop better ones, and help us develop new ones as well, help us actually be open to making new friends. It's really about, you could say cultivating, but you could also just say tuning into this universal quality of metta that eventually, in its culmination, has no emotionally charged preference as to who comes within its beam. Metta is often compared to the sun, and the sun, of course, shines on planets when they're in its beams. Otherwise, the light just radiates out into space. And metta is rather like that. The goal of it is actually a sort of attitude and way of being that is beautiful and deeply satisfying in itself, which will then be activated into particular qualities and particular relationship only when it comes into contact with another being. So I suppose I'm just trying to just gently draw us away from preoccupations with our individual relationships that might make the Metta-bhavana rather hard work, I think, at times. It does matter what comes into our mind and what our response is when we bring our friend to mind, the neutral person, and so on. But really what it's pointing to is ways in which we still need to develop, rather than something our friend needs to do, or even something we need to do for our friend. That might usefully come into it, the second of those. But really what it's showing us is usually just our own limitations that we want to grow beyond. So we mustn't be too specific about those opening stages. Really, I think partly those are showing us these different colours of our emotional responses before we sort of take that leap into the universe of the fifth stage. Our founder, Sangharakshita, has said that, you've probably heard this read in pujas if you've been around much time, that he thinks it's possible to be friends with any other human being, and that he'd rather die than give up that belief, which I find very, very strong indeed. interesting view of sort of religion. It's in a paragraph he wrote about religion and it's the point of it. Partly because it's so non-mystical and so radical that you could be friends with any other human being, and that he'd rather die than give up the belief. I think in our own lives, it's just trying to prise us gently away from that thing of there being certain people we want to see, even certain things we want to get out of that interaction in a certain way we want them to behave, certain other people we don't care about, and a small pocket of people we really don't want to see. So don't get too enclosed in that kind of perspective on the Metta-bhavana, and remember that it's about the ability to be friends with any other human being in the end. He's also said in a seminar for order members once who, well, when we were able to gather, we're doing it online at the moment, but we often have events for our own order, so for people who've made the commitment of ordination, i.e. committed their lives to the ideals of Buddhism. You should get to a point where, even if there's a friend of yours you're really looking forward to seeing on a certain order weekend, if they suddenly can't be there, someone else is there instead, you are equally glad to see them. And you don't feel downcast that you can't see your own friend. You might, of course, be concerned if something's happened to them, but person A doesn't turn up, person B does instead, you just respond to them in the same way. So that's sort of part of the vision. Do you mind just grabbing my water there? Sorry, I forgot to bring it with me. Thanks, Sam. I don't want to go out of frame. Thank you. Just say something about where I think people sometimes go wrong in the fifth stage. Where supposedly we're supposed to conjure loving kindness to all sentient beings, which does sound rather far-fetched sometimes. One place I think people can go wrong is in actually trying to visualise that. Quite difficult when you think about it, because it's not just all beings that exist now, it's all beings yet to be born as well. So take you quite a long time. And I just think of that as being sort of too cinematic, that we're trying to sort of pan out over a big crowd like the climax of a music video or something, and just watch that extend further and further and further, and yet take in, you know, that person, and then there's all the people in that country, and all the people in that country, and sort of rather tiring. I think the antidote to that is, well, two things. One, just imagination. Just imagine lots of different people. Imagine the people yet to be born, because it extends in time as well as space. And the other is not to rely too much on the visualization itself. So don't feel you've actually got to picture hundreds and hundreds of beings. You probably want to just eventually feel into a sort of warmth that could embrace more and more people. You might want to imagine meeting lots of people or seeing people. Sometimes I conjure in my mind being at the front door of the Buddhist centre, obviously pre-pandemic, but feeling warm and welcoming towards anybody who might come in, which over the years would be a really large number of people. So beware the traffic being a bit too cinematic and then telling yourself that it's unrealistic, and or a bit kind of corny. And I think the fifth stage is a great time to bring in members of your family, friends you haven't so far, people you only just remember. But crucially, use that to extend. It's almost the movement that's more important than the individual beings. It's the extension of that feeling of these people too, and these people too, and then there's even those people I don't know, and then there's even those people I've never seen, and feel an expansion, which you could even just try to experience a bit in the body, and imagine yourself opening out more and more. Yeah. So I think I'll say something about friendship, and then perhaps go back to this equanimity quality. So, I think the other thing that this practice is getting at isn't a sort of sickly sweet sort of liking of everyone, or imagining that we like everyone. But I think the potential for friendship that's encapsulated in that Sangharakshita quote I was repeating is the spirit of it. And that is to do with feeling that you could be friends with any other human being, or let's say on the level of our practice, with slightly more human beings, or slightly more types of them. I remember a friend of mine saying at university once that he now felt he had enough friends and didn't want any more. And I knew what he meant. He might have been talking about, the number of hours there were in the day and week. But it was interesting, I instinctively felt that there was something wrong with it. And I didn't know what to do with my response. I don't know if I said anything much, but there was something about it I didn't quite like or even trust. I don't know if that's a sort of bit of a confession, but I thought, there's something about that doesn't sound good, actually, even though on the logical level I knew what he meant. Anyway, I've sometimes thought about that since because, gosh, now I'm thinking I might have said this last week. Anyway, never mind. Maybe some of you didn't hear it. And Sam's shaking his head, that's a good sign. I think the really experienced Buddhists I know are always open to new friendships, and I find that really interesting. So people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that I know are open to making new connections with people, starting to meet up with people they've only just met, continuing to working with them on projects, living with them and actually getting to know them quite deeply. And that I can see myself, in the case of some of these more experienced order members or Buddhists I'm thinking of, having sort of stepped into that flow at a certain time, but that flow just going on and on. And I find that a real manifestation of this, if you like, rather ideal sounding potential for friendship with any other human being. That the way we practice that is being available to friendship, remembering that friendship, rather than being an object that sort of hovers in the air between two people, is actually a sort of spirit or attitude or a way in which we act. Because even people who think of themselves as friends can act towards each other. Let's simplify this. It's possible to act as a friend towards somebody and not act as a friend towards them, whether or not you think of them as your pal. You see what I mean? And that's the kind of on-the-ground practice, this availability to friendship and real cultivation of it, that points us in that direction of metta. So all I'm saying here really is that if the fifth stage sounds a bit far-fetched or a bit cinematic or a bit unconvincing, remember your own practice of friendship, and that the flowering of the fifth stage of the Metta Bhavana, I think, is that you don't decide that you just have enough friends now and you're going to cap it where it is, that you're open to people kind of ongoingly, which isn't easy. It might be, wanting to manage our experience as well that's telling us I can't be doing with meeting more people or opening up to more people. Because it's sort of, ongoingly practicing friendship. It's kind of a bumpy ride, actually. Especially when you feel a bond with somebody that you nonetheless don't necessarily get on with, or even some of the time, or a lot of the time, day to day, don't particularly like. I've actually had this experience in spite of myself, that I know I'm connected to somebody already, that's, as it were, already happened. Whether or not I like them starts to take at least second place, if not become unimportant, I think, at the best times. So that leads me on to saying something about equanimity, which I think is the name for the vision of this stage of the practice. Equanimity really is to do with having some emotional independence from our pleasure and pain, which is not the same as being emotionally detached. So it really means that we're not going to be led by pleasure and pain. We're not going to decide what we do according to pleasure and pain. God, it's so easy to say, but so hard to do. I just want to make clear that I'm not saying I manage that all the time. but we're able to judge a situation with a bit of wisdom, including who we choose to spend our time with, and sort of open up to, and try to create conditions where they can open up to us. So the wisdom aspect of equanimity, because this is a real equanimity really equals love plus wisdom, to put it really briefly. Equanimity is love in its maturest form, because it recognises that all beings are subject to these sort of flows of pleasure and pain, like we are, but that those pleasures and pains are what we call conditioned, which means they're impermanent and don't have ultimate substance, and arise and cease according to sort of ever-flowing conditions, which means that you can't hold on to your pleasure, you're not condemned to your pain, but you'll probably experience both, many, many more times, and just sort of keep going for as long as we're unenlightened, keep moving through life sort of subject to these things, and to some extent having our actions dictated by them, but trying to sort of lessen and reduce that a bit. So equanimity realises that that's true of other beings, and responds accordingly with wisdom. We've had these other types of metta, these other Brahma Viharas in this series. So Karuna is an expression of metta where it comes across a person who's suffering, mudita, or sympathetic joy, where it comes into contact with a person who's feeling joy. Equanimity is a sort of culmination of a sort of synthesis of all of those, because it contains all of those, but also goes beyond them by not only zooming in on pleasures and pains, and that's the same on our own side, by not being dictated by our likes and dislikes. So that was a bit of a rapid loop through some of that stuff, but I hope that makes sense. So the thing I really wanted to emphasise for our own life is that we'll see that our own likes and dislikes are not necessarily the same as value. Pleasure and pain are there. They're just not something to have our life be led by, which is what hedonism is, really. Hedonism comes from a word meaning feeling tone. In other words, I used to think hedonism just meant partying, but it actually means living only according to the dictates of pleasure and pain. So pursuing pleasure utterly and avoiding pain any way you can. Equanimity is the sort of wisdom opposite of hedonism, if you like. So, one more quick thing about this, and then we'll do a little bit of meditation. So I've said that friendship is the way to actually practice on the ground this vision of the fifth stage of the metta. I also want to say that the spiritual community, or sangha, so the community of people practicing these particular values and cultivating amongst ourselves this particular language for the values, is the context in which to do that. So you've got this vision of the fifth stage, potential to be friends with any other human being, which I appreciate is quite a big ask and we haven't had much time to go into. So that's the vision. The practice of continuing openness to friendship, and the context where that happens, which I would say is the sangha. And that's because you may have noticed, if you're a Buddhist meditator, that there's quite a limit on what you can do in your communication that you're learning to cultivate with people who aren't doing the same. Buddhists often find this when they go and visit their families, that suddenly a lot of their sort of tools aren't available that they've been cultivating in their lives, and that's quite understandable, because if the people they go and see aren't practicing, we can't really expect anything else. But you do need to sort of strengthen all those muscles as much as you can amidst people who are doing the same thing, so that they can appreciate your efforts, reflect back, so that we can learn from them. So that's really the sort of crucible in which it happens. So if you like, the fifth stage, you could say that the Sangha is a sort of workshop in which to work on that. Of course, I know that the Sangha isn't the limit to the vision of the fifth stage. The fifth stage really means it means all sentient beings. So that's not prejudicial as to who is or isn't practicing Buddhism. But I think I just wanted to make clear that we do need to make friends with others who are practicing these same things in order to go more deeply into their cultivation, to strengthen those qualities in us so that we can offer them to the world more widely and ultimately anywhere we went and whoever we happen to come across. Good. So that's something about the fifth stage of the metta and equanimity. So we'll do a little meditation now just to kind of settle that into our heart, I think. Good to keep alternating between these modes, listening, reflecting and meditating, so that we can just relax away from the words I've said and just do the first, second and fifth stage of the metta bhavana. We'll do the first two stages quite quickly and then allow a bit more time for that last stage for you to just feel your sphere of warmth and concern expanding. And remember that it is, in a way, yourself expanding to include more and more other beings and value them as you value yourself. Okay, so I'll lead us through that. Fred will dim the lights. So yeah, just get comfortable for meditation again. We won't sit for long. So I'll just lead us through a few stages of the metta bhavana. So letting your weight sink into the cushion as before. Softening the face and the shoulders. Letting the breath soften the torso. And just tuning into your own wish to grow. And encouraging that sense that you want your own life to flourish, increase your qualities, and that is quite valid and a good thing in the world. And bringing a good friend now into this atmosphere of warmth and goodwill. And just wanting what is beneficial for them. and with yourself and your friend in mind now. Just very gently bring more beings into your mind. And you only really need to touch them with your mind. You don't need to start thinking about them. So anybody else in the room that you're in, or the same building. You could imagine the sunshine and warmth of this metta radiating out from you indiscriminately towards them. You could start taking in people in the surrounding area. Or the whole town or city if you're in one. But keep encouraging your mind to expand. Just see if you can open your heart to more people. So letting that stage of the meditation recede gently now. And coming back to the body, breathing. Okay, so that's it for the first half of the class. We'll just take a short break now, rearrange the room a little bit, and you could stretch your legs or get a drink or do what you need to do, and Savannah, Jyoti and I will answer your questions. So again, if you've got questions from that practice or from what I've said this evening, just type them into the chat box with a capital Q on the front, and Sam will read them out to us. So you can be thinking about your questions while we have a short break. Okay. You are on now.
Oh, yeah. You know, anyone would think that we weren't professionals. Yes, we're on now. Hello, welcome back, everybody. Yeah, and just to start by thanking Prajnamanas for a very, very thoughtful, stimulating dive deep into the fifth stage of the Metta Bhavana, actually. So do send us some questions while I'm sort of introducing the second half. If you put a big Q at the front of the question in the chat box, and then hopefully we'll be able to do our best to give a bit of an answer of some kind. Yeah. So and hopefully you saw a bit of that very fine mind of his that I was talking about at the beginning. So yeah, thanks. That's great. I'm sure that would have stimulated quite a lot of challenging questions. Shall we see what we've got?
Let's do it, and we've got some already, I think.
I think we have, yes. Sam, what's our first one then?
So the first question, Leah and Sue sort of have a similar question, which is, do you think it's possible to be friends with people who are dangerous?
Actually, Sam, do you want to come and say it into the microphone, and then I don't have to try and remember it and repeat it back?
So Leah and Sue sort of have a similar question, and that is, do you think that it's possible to be friends with people who are dangerous? There is sociopathy and violent variants thereof. Would being a friend just be wishing them well but staying away?
Right. Nice easy one to start with then.
Do you feel able to have a crack at that?
Yeah, I don't mind having a crack at that. Okay. So, I think this whole sort of, what do we mean when we say that we're being someone's friend? So I suppose there's lots of ways one could respond to your question there. But I think I'd probably say something like, what do we mean by being a friend? So from a sort of Buddhist perspective, what we would mean is that we were really genuinely wanting what was in the best interests of that being and other beings. Sorry, we've got an exploding plastic bottle for some reason. I don't quite why. Sorry, I've just distracted myself there. Yeah, so from a Buddhist perspective, being friends would be wanting what was absolutely in the best interests of that being and all other beings. So in a way, if you were to be friends with someone who was dangerous, it would be, from a Buddhist point of view, it wouldn't necessarily mean we're going to go out for coffee and cake, and he's going to tell me all the bad things he's done over the weekend, and whatever it might be, who he's hurt or who he's, whatever it is. It's not that sort of friend that, from a Buddhist point of view, that's not really what friendship means. Friendship is in a way, it's a lot more kind of challenging, because it would be about trying to find a way to wish this person well, their fundamental humanity, but not condone or agree with behaviour that was harmful to them or to anybody else. And I'm aware, as I'm saying that, that's a huge thing, and there's a lot of people in the world that have done very, very terrible things to other people, and that's hugely challenging, and that's what makes this kind of so radical. But sometimes I kind of think of it a bit like, if all beings were genuinely in the most positive states of mind, then they wouldn't behave badly. So it's something about, so if I can wish that on to people, then I'm sort of wishing for them to behave, in ways that are positive for everybody. And I'm also aware, Leah, that you are a criminologist, so you've probably got your own thoughts on that. But I'm going to ask Prajnamanas, what would you like to say to that?
Well, I liked what you said about what's in somebody's best interests, and I think being a friend is working towards somebody's best interests, rather than, especially as you say, necessarily agreeing with or condoning their own views or actions. But I think there's also something in the distinction I was making between our usual language of being friends with as opposed to acting as a friend to. I think that's important here. Because I think if we sort of literalise it into being friends with it, it's sort of the same pitfall as in the fifth stage of the Metta-bhavana, where it feels like we've literally got to have time to go around all sentient beings, with a good word for all of them, sort of thing. Really, I think what's behind that Sangharakshita quote about possible to be friends with any other human being is to do with potential, and that attitude in ourselves. Ooh, gosh, keeps us on its toes. That particular water bottle. But it's very good in the meditation, wasn't I?
You were great.
I didn't react.
I freezed.
Where was I? Yeah, I mean, I think acting as a friend to somebody, it could really mean just doing the kindest thing. I mean, partly I'm thinking, there's letter writing to people in prison, isn't there? There's not abandoning in our attitude anybody, not cutting people off, and perhaps especially not wishing people ill. I mean, in Buddhism, our actions of mind are, actions just like our actions of body and speech. So thought isn't a sort of abstract private matter, it's actually something that has effects in the world, in the Buddhist tradition, and so wishing somebody well partly is acting in friendship to them. Wishing somebody ill is going against that. So having a bit of wisdom about the conditionedness of somebody's life, like I was mentioning in terms of equanimity, and also forgiving people, working to forgive people, that's also an act of friendship. There's a few thoughts for Leah.
Yeah, and it also just occurred to me the sort of golden rule that that the Buddha said, that hatred is never stilled by hatred. It's only love that can overcome hatred. So that kind of goes with what you were saying about the, and I'm aware it's very easy for me to say this. I'm not saying that it's easy to do when you're in that situation, but working towards feeling that sense of what's in someone's best interest is ultimately, because hatred is not going to help. It's just going to make it worse. Yeah. Okay.
Should we take another question?
So, how do we respond to people when we attempt to be friendly when they don't want to be friends?
Good question.
Okay.
I don't mind. Well, kick us off.
Yeah, okay. That means you always get the time to think then.
Oh, do I? Right. I'll just start if you like. I simply need it.
That's okay. I can go if you want.
All right.
Okay, I'll go. I can't remember what the question was now. What
do we do if we try to be friendly with someone
and they don't want to be friends? Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I suppose in a way that partly is about what is our motivation in a sense. And again, I suppose the ideal, the Buddhist ideal, is that we act, as Prajnamanas was saying, is that we're acting as a friend and being friendly towards others in the way that we are with them, no matter what they, no matter whether we get anything back from that or not. That can be challenging because of course we're human, and we see someone, we like somebody and we want to be their friend, and we move towards them for that, and if for whatever reason they don't appear to want that, then that is painful because we're human. But from a Buddhist point of view, it would be about not doing the thing in order for what you're going to get out of it in a certain sense. So so there's not so much that attitude of reciprocity, like, oh, if I'm nice to them, then they'll become my friend because I want a friend, which is our sort of normal way of being. I don't want to sort of diminish that or dismiss that or say there's anything wrong with that. That's a very natural human way to be. If you were really coming from a perspective of metta, if you were an enlightened being, it wouldn't matter how the other person behaved towards you. You'd still be in this field of metta that Prajnamanas was describing, where you're not affected by the pleasure and pain of how some pleasure or pain of how someone else is with you. And that's challenging, really challenging.
Mm. Thank you for time to think. I've come up with something.
You're very welcome.
It's just as you mentioned a Buddha, and I thought I'd say something about the enlightened perspective, or at least the records of the Buddha's life, which are that he always spoke to people's benefit. So of all of the sort of paupers and princes and everything in between that came to see him and who he came into contact with, he found a skillful, wise, beneficial way of speaking to them. That might be a better way of, or we should remember that ultimate expression of this act of friendship. So a loving and skillful communication. I think that's really what we're saying is you can get into relation with anybody over a loving and skillful communication. I mean, I'm glad we're unpacking this because I can see the potential problems with this quote now that I've brought it into the discussion, but because I suppose it sounds a bit like it presupposes something about them, this potential to be friends with any other human being. So I guess you've got to assume some sort of communication for this to be true, some sort of some degree of reciprocal openness, because after all, the people who came to speak to the Buddha, even if they were sort of reacting to him as well or critical of him, at least wanted to get into communication with him and come up to him and say, hey, I don't agree with your teaching because of this, that and the other, or what do you say about this, or I hear you've said such and such, is that true? From that point onwards, he could always get into skillful communication with somebody, and I think befriend, really. I mean, Angulimala in the traditional story, the mass murderer, becomes a follower of the Buddha, and in a later sutta, after Angulimala has decided to stop murdering people and follow the Buddha, he appears again with the Buddha, enjoining him to bear the sticks and arrows of people's hatred for him. So giving him sort of kindly steer or a bit of advice after that. So it's just one hint in the scripture that you can see him continuing to be in communication with this now monk, ex-murderer. So there's probably something in that too. Yeah. Shall we?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sophie asks, how would you be friends with someone who does not share your values and whom you do not like? What would that friendship consist of?
Yeah. Well, shall I go?
Yes. I don't always have to go first. Now that you pointed it out, I suppose I was going to say it's sort of similar territory, isn't it? That you, I suppose you can't necessarily want things from the other person, but you can still act as a friend for them. I think you can even act in somebody's benefit without necessarily having to speak to them. That could be an action of your mind or an attitude of your mind. Or it could be some form of communication with them that doesn't necessarily involve spending lots of time together. It's really a sort of spirit of friendship towards somebody. I think actually it could even be not forcing on them communication that they don't want. If we get the wrong end of the stick with friendliness, we could start trying to smother people with it, and actually of a kind or with a timing that's not beneficial to them.
Yeah, I suppose what was coming up for me when you were speaking, we were talking sort of quite in the abstract in a way at the moment, but of course, and I'm not sure if this is partly where your question was coming from. Sophie, was it Sophie? Yeah, Sophie. But it's a bit of a sort of feels a bit of a cliche in a way to say that we seem to be living in this increasingly polarized world where people's sort of attachment to their own sets of values about how society should be run, how the world should be run, etc., appears to be coming, if we can sort of believe the mainstream media, it appears to be becoming more and more polarized. So we are all in this situation where we're living in a society where our next door neighbour or our colleague or whoever it might be might have very, very different values and views to us on all sorts of different things. But I suppose I would go back, I'd go back again to saying, by pushing away people who don't think the way that we think and not wanting to deal with them and not want, then that's how that polarization happens, and then that just becomes worse and worse and worse. So one of the things one of the things that I like very much about our order is that actually there's quite a lot of different opinions in the order about all sorts of things, isn't there? Yeah. So, it's not, it's not one of those sort of clubs that you join where everybody's got the same views on things. And sometimes I kind of wish it were, because it might be slightly easier, but much more comfortable. But I think there's something very... personally, fundamentally, I think there's something very healthy about that. I believe that the order members, as order members, we're trying to come together on the basis of our sort of fundamental, our spiritual practice. But actually, we might have very different values and views as to what that might look like in the world. So therefore, how do we continue to be in harmony with each other? And the only way to do that is to find a way to hold less, is to soften your own views. I'm not saying that you give up your own views or be a doormat in some way, but just to be softer around them and to realise that nobody has the full perspective on anything, and if we can have that sort of try to find some respect for each other, and to act as a friend, in the sense that I shan't name any particular world leaders, but let's just say maybe there are some world leaders around these days that people might have strong views about. If we could, I sometimes put world leaders into my 5th stage of the Metta Bhavana, because I think, I wish for you to be in really positive mental states, because then you would, then you'd be a good world leader, basically. So it's something about wishing them well, even though I don't share their values at all, but I can still wish them well in principle, because in principle that's going to be a benefit for everyone. Gosh, I did a bit of that, sort of went off on one a bit.
No, that's good. That's very good.
But I think it's important, because it's not just about us and our friends. This is, our order is, we're not monks and nuns. We're sort of in, we've got one foot in the world, and we're also spiritual practitioners. So we have to engage with, what the Buddha's teachings would be saying in this sort of crazy 21st century global community where everything's on the internet.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing in views and what people think via the question and your answer, partly because it's particularly charged, isn't it? Opinions are sort of can be us at our worst, really, our strong opinions about the world somehow. Often notice actually how connection can be lost in a conversation where people dive into strong opinions about the world. I don't know if you've noticed that. Sometimes you can be speaking with somebody and then suddenly it feels like, you're not so much in aware dialogue anymore once somebody goes into, well, I tell you what, here's what I think about such and such an issue. Funny shift happens. Anyway, these things do need acknowledging and discussing, so it's not like that shouldn't go on. But I suppose I just wanted to say that I think you're right about the kind of multiplicity of views and opinions in the order and in the Sangha, and that the way out of polarising around that is just the basic practice in the Metta Bhavana of curiosity and interest. And it's got to be interest in the person and curiosity about them. I think there could even be a slightly too clinical, gosh, I wonder how they've fallen into such a wrong idea about politics, you know. I don't really mean, gosh, how interesting to think that, gosh, how interesting. Interesting as euphemism for, you know, idiotic, which it's sometimes used as. I really mean the opinions of secondary at best in terms of a person. They're not actually how to get to know a person. I find them more and more sort of like a surface matter, actually, and I think when you start practicing, way more changeable than you thought, less substantial, way more like you're going to the territory of, God, I really don't know, as well, so hard to know. So yeah, I just wanted to say that views and opinions can be actually rather distracting from the person themselves, and that what we're really practicing with metta is curiosity about that person and a real interest in them, including, you know, them and their views, but what's their whole, what is the whole of them, of which this is a small part, you know, very important, I think. Otherwise we just, you know what it's like, especially with politics, which is I think sort of what we're talking about, isn't it? A certain view comes up, you think, oh, don't want to hear that one, you know, and you go straight into your reasons why that's wrong and why I don't want to hear it and why that's not true.
And why I therefore don't like that person and don't want to be their friend.
Exactly, and the person can end up being cut off, or we cut ourselves off from them. Quite a shame.
Tricky stuff. Sam, how are we doing for time? Oh, we've got a wee bit more. Any more?
Yeah? This one Stephen asks...
Stephen in Dundalk.
Stephen in Dundalk.
Hooray.
Is it selfish to wish someone well in the fourth stage, if only so they won't harm or upset you?
Is it selfish to wish someone well in the fourth stage just so they won't harm and upset you? Yeah. Well, I suppose... in a way, my first response to that question is I wouldn't get too hung up on, am I being selfish? Personally, I wouldn't get too hung up on, is it selfish to think this? Because, you know, I feel like with a little tweak in that, you could go from, can I wish this person really well? Because if we wish that person were really well in themselves and happy and healthy and thriving and flourishing, then, you know, they probably wouldn't be behaving how they're behaving towards you anyway. So it's something about shifting the emphasis more onto, can you sort of, in a way, park yourself and wish well for them? And it's almost like a side effect would be then, that they'd probably be nice. If that were to happen, you probably would benefit. But it's something about shifting that away from what's in it for me, in a sense, rather than this sense of sort of parking yourself and wishing them well in themselves. You know, and you can do the things like realising that you yourself are probably the difficult person to somebody else. Possibly to that person, you know, who knows. So that's one thing I would say. And another thing I think I would say is, you know, we also have to work with where we are. And, you know, you can only be where you are. You can only start from where you are. And, you know, in a way, if it sort of works, if it starts to open up your heart towards that person, I wouldn't worry too much about, because we can get into all this kind of analysis and post-mortem and, oh, you know, am I being a bad person because is it selfish to and then you're sort of just caught up in a whole lot of sort of are the stories that you're bringing in. You know, the principle is this opening me up to another being, to approach it in this way. That's my sort of response. Do you want to say something?
Sure. I mean, mine's similar really, which is don't allow your motivation to block you. Don't worry too much. Don't feel you need to get the motivation right before moving on to the action. Because if it is well-wishing, the effects of that won't be limited to the goal you have in mind of this person not upsetting you. It will just be beneficial in the world. So you could reflect on that if it is well-wishing, that good things will come of it. I think you've been demanding with yourself, Stephen, in your question, and if I was sort of demanding about its terms, I suppose I'd say only wanting somebody not to harm us. Maybe that does stretch the definition of well-wishing, because I think that's an instinct, that's wanting to protect our own self. I think I'm wanting to say there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's important. There is the first stage of the metta, and like I say, ourself is even in the fifth stage of the metta at the beginning of it. So there's nothing wrong with that. You might just want to check whether your response is centered on yourself or them, and start to try to look to the person themselves and what will benefit them. Maybe just sort of shift the center from yourself to them if that happens, but don't decide that it's not well-wishing and you're not practicing metta if you spot a motivation that you find limited.
Great. That will help, Stephen. You can let us know next week.
That's it, just a lot of gratitude.
That's it, a lot of gratitude. Perfect timing. Thank you very much for the gratitude. Yeah, lovely, great. Okay, so we're just about to hit our watershed. We're going to go off air in a moment. But just to say thank you all so much for joining us, and for those very stimulating questions, weren't they? For
Excellent
us?
Discussion, thank you very much.
Yeah, it was really good.
Thanks for drawing us out.
And thank you very much, Prajnamanas, for that talk that sort of brought that out of all of us. And to Sam and Fred for your excellent technical assistance. Thank you very much for that. Just to say, I'm not entirely sure what's happening next week.
Nor me. But same time, same place.
Same time, same place,
sure.
and there'll be a special mystery something happening with somebody that isn't us, but it'll be somebody, won't
related to Buddhism and meditation for sure.
Yes. So do come back next Wednesday evening and see what's on offer. Also just to say, we are in this, very strange situation, of course. Here we are, like it's a little mini television studio, and beaming it out to you all. And for those of you who have used to come to the building, you will know that normally this room would have been filled with people on a Wednesday night. And so as part of the sort of current situation, we're offering the talks and meditations and things, because we just really want everybody to have access to the Buddha's teachings, especially in these very difficult times. And nobody gets paid to teach here. We all teach here as volunteers. The technical team are volunteers. We all do it because we want to give back something to the centre that's given us so much. So there's a kind of spirit and ethos of generosity, which is very much in line with the Buddha's teachings. And if you feel so moved and you would like to join with us in that spirit of generosity, it'd be really fantastic if you felt able to give us a donation for the session this evening. I think Sam, will you be putting he's putting something into the chat box if you're able to do that. And if you're not able to do that, or you don't want to do that, that's absolutely fine too. It's not an exchange culture. It's about inviting generosity in each other and in you if you want to join with that. Is that it? Have I said everything? Have I done everything?
You've
Technical team?
You've said and done everything, yeah.
I've said and done everything,
Yeah.
That's fantastic, great. Well, then that's it. Thank you very much. And Have a good week with lots of metta, lots of fifth stage metta. Bye bye for now.
Thank you. Good night.